My husband mocked my blue dress at dinner. I got revenge by exposing my husband and his mistress. I still remember that fateful evening as if it were yesterday, though it unfolded on what felt like an ordinary night in our lavish home. My husband, Daniel, mocked me right in front of his lover, Serena, and his circle of so-called friends while they all laughed at my expense. 15 minutes later, he was on his knees, begging me not to leave. "Did you borrow that from a thrift store?" Daniel sneered, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of everyone in the room. His lover, Serena, leaned closer to him, her perfectly manicured fingers brushing against his arm as she smirked. "I didn't know they still made clothes like that," he added, his words dripping with venomous humor. "Hey, beautiful people, your support means everything to me. Help me reach my next big milestone by hitting that subscribe button. It's free, supports the channel, and ensures you never miss an amazing video. Let's dive in." The laughter that followed was sharp, biting, and orchestrated to humiliate me. I could feel their eyes on me, scanning my dress, dissecting my appearance, and finding delight in my discomfort. The wine glass in my hand felt heavier than before, and my fingers tightened around the stem as if holding on to it could somehow keep me grounded. It wasn't the first time Daniel had mocked me, but it was the first time he had done it so brazenly in front of his friends, and worse, his lover. The dress I had chosen was one he used to love, a soft blue gown that once made him call me beautiful. Now it was a prop in his cruel performance, a tool for him to demonstrate his power by belittling me. I smiled weakly, my face frozen in an expression that I hoped would disguise the storm raging inside me. I wanted to scream, to throw the wine glass at his feet and shatter the fragile facade of our marriage, but I didn't, not yet. Years of enduring his subtle digs and dismissive tone had taught me the value of silence. It was a weapon, sharp and deadly when wielded correctly, and tonight I would learn to use it. Serena's laughter was the worst. It was high-pitched and condescending, each note a reminder that she was everything I wasn't. Young, glamorous, effortlessly confident. "Oh, come on, Daniel," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Don't be so harsh. I think it's charming. Retro, maybe." Her words stung more than his. They weren't just mocking my dress, they were mocking my entire existence. I glanced around the room, searching for a friendly face, but found none. His friends, a carefully curated group of enablers, were all too eager to join in on the ridicule. Their laughter blended into the music playing softly in the background, a cruel symphony orchestrated by my husband. I excused myself to the restroom, my voice calm and composed despite the fire building inside me. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and I leaned against the sink, gripping its edges as if it were the only thing keeping me upright. My reflection in the mirror was a stranger, a woman with hollow eyes and a trembling lower lip, her cheeks flushed from more than just the wine. How had I become this person? How had I allowed myself to shrink so much that I could barely recognize the woman staring back at me? I used to be strong, independent, full of dreams and ambition. Now I was just a shadow, existing in the periphery of Daniel's world, enduring his ridicule because I didn't know how to leave. But something shifted in that moment. The weight of his words, of all the years of subtle cruelty, pressed down on me like a heavy stone. And just as stones can crush, they can also sharpen. A quiet fury began to rise, steady and unyielding, burning away the remnants of the woman who had once begged for his approval. I fixed my makeup with steady hands, smoothing the lines smudged by humiliation. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. Not tonight. I wasn't sure what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing for certain: I was done playing the part of the docile wife. When I returned to the party, the laughter had subsided, replaced by the low hum of conversation. Daniel glanced at me as I walked in, his expression unreadable. Maybe he expected me to be sulking, retreating into a corner while his friends continued their cruel game. Instead, I took my seat beside him, my posture straight and my smile sharp. "Is everything all right, darling?" he asked, his tone mocking. I met his gaze, holding it for a moment longer than necessary, and nodded. "Perfect," I said, my voice cool and steady. "Absolutely perfect." The rest of the evening passed in a blur, but I felt different. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to fit into his world. I wasn't trying to impress his friends or outshine Serena's obvious attempts to flaunt her hold on him. I was detached, observing the scene like an outsider, cataloging every insult, every smug smile, every moment of ridicule. They thought they were winning, but they didn't realize the game had changed. When the party finally ended and we were alone in the car, the silence between us was heavy, almost suffocating. Daniel reached over to touch my hand, but I pulled away, staring out the window at the passing streetlights. "What's wrong with you tonight?" he asked, his voice tinged with irritation. I turned to him, my expression calm. "Nothing," I said. "I just have a lot to think about." The unease in his eyes was satisfying, but I didn't let it show. He didn't press further, probably assuming I would sulk for a few days before returning to my usual self. He didn't realize that the woman sitting beside him wasn't the same one he had mocked hours earlier. When we arrived home, I went straight to the bedroom. Closing the door behind me, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the blue dress that now felt like a relic of a past life. Slowly, methodically, I removed it, folding it neatly before placing it in the back of the closet. It wasn't just a dress, it was a symbol of the woman I used to be, the one who cared too much about his approval. I wouldn't need it anymore. Daniel knocked on the door, his voice softer now. "Are you coming to bed?" "In a minute," I replied, my tone neutral. As the door clicked shut behind him, I let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of years of silence lifting off my shoulders. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew one thing for sure. This was the beginning of the end, for him, for us, for the illusion he had worked so hard to create. I wasn't going to leave quietly. No, Daniel and everyone who had laughed at me tonight would feel the full force of my fury. They had taken my dignity, my confidence, my joy, and I was going to take it all back, piece by piece. The morning after the dinner party, the house was eerily quiet. Daniel had left early for work without a word, as though the previous night's events had no significance. It was his usual pattern: mock, humiliate, and move on as if nothing had happened. But I couldn't move on. The fire that had been ignited in me the night before had only grown stronger, and I was done pretending everything was fine. The hours passed in a blur of routine, but my mind was anything but calm. I replayed every word, every sneer, and every laugh from the dinner party, the way Serena had looked at me, her eyes dripping with condescension, and how Daniel had used me as the butt of his jokes, while the people he called friends joined in without hesitation. The humiliation was like a wound that refused to heal, and I knew it wouldn't until I confronted him. By the time Daniel returned home that evening, I had prepared myself. I wasn't sure how he would react, but I didn't care anymore. I was done walking on eggshells around him, done trying to shield myself from his emotional landmines. As he walked through the door, his tie slightly askew and his phone glued to his hand, I stood in the kitchen, waiting. "Hey," he said casually, barely glancing at me. "Dinner ready?" I folded my arms, leaning against the counter. "We need to talk." His brow furrowed as he finally looked at me. "Talk about what?" "Last night," I said, keeping my voice calm. "The way you mocked me in front of your friends and Serena." Daniel sighed, setting his phone down on the counter. "Oh, come on. You're not still upset about that, are you? It was just a bit of fun. You know how they are." "No, Daniel," I said, my voice rising slightly. "It wasn't just fun. It was humiliating. You made me feel like a joke." He rolled his eyes, his expression shifting from dismissive to annoyed. "You're overreacting. Everyone was just joking around. Why do you always have to take things so seriously?" The words stung, but I refused to let him see it. "Because it wasn't a joke to me," I said firmly. "Do you have any idea how it felt to sit there while you and your lover laughed at me?" Daniel froze for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, my voice steady. "Serena. The way you look at her, the way she touches your arm, the way she laughs at every little thing you say. Do you think I'm blind?" His expression darkened, and for a moment I thought he might deny it, but instead he scoffed, shaking his head. "You're being ridiculous. Serena is just a friend." "A friend who conveniently happens to show up at every social event we attend," I shot back. "A friend who seems to know more about your life than I do." Daniel didn't respond immediately. Instead, he grabbed a glass from the cabinet and poured himself a drink. "I don't have time for this," he muttered, taking a sip. "You're making something out of nothing." I stared at him, disbelief coursing through me. "You don't have time for this? You don't have time to address the fact that you've been treating me like garbage? That you humiliated me in front of your friends and your lover?" "Enough," he snapped, slamming the glass down on the counter. "I said it was just a joke. Why can't you let it go?" "Because I'm done letting it go," I shouted, my voice breaking. "I'm done letting you treat me like I don't matter. I'm done pretending that this marriage is anything more than a facade." His eyes widened slightly, and for a moment I saw something resembling fear, but it was quickly replaced by anger. "Oh, so now you're the victim," he sneered. "You've always been so dramatic. Always looking for a reason to feel sorry for yourself." The words hit me like a slap, but instead of breaking me, they fueled the fire inside me. I stepped closer to him, my voice low but steady. "I'm not the victim, Daniel. I'm the woman who's finally waking up to the fact that I deserve better than this." He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "Better than this? Good luck finding someone who'll put up with your constant whining and insecurities." I felt the tears welling up in my eyes, but I blinked them back, refusing to let him see me cry. "You know what, Daniel?" I said, my voice calm despite the storm raging inside me. "You're right. I do deserve better, and I'm going to find it." With that, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving him standing there, his drink forgotten on the counter. My heart was pounding, my hands trembling, but I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in years, I had stood up to him, refused to let him dismiss my feelings or make me feel small. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind raced with thoughts of what I would do next, how I would take back the power he had stolen from me, piece by piece. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I also knew I couldn't stay in a marriage that had become a prison. Next morning, Daniel tried to act as though nothing had happened. He made coffee, scrolling through his phone as if our argument the night before was a minor inconvenience. But I wasn't going to let him sweep it under the rug. As I sat across from him at the breakfast table, I looked him in the eye and said, "I'm leaving." He blinked, his hand freezing mid-scroll. "What?" "I'm leaving," I repeated. "This marriage is over." Daniel laughed, a short, incredulous sound. "Don't be ridiculous. You're not going anywhere." "I'm serious, Daniel," I said, my voice firm. "I'm done. I've had enough of your cruelty, your lies, your complete lack of respect. I deserve better, and I'm not going to waste another second of my life pretending this marriage is worth saving." His expression shifted from disbelief to anger. "You can't just walk away," he said, his voice low and threatening. "You don't get to make that decision." "Watch me," I said, standing up from the table. "You've made it clear time and time again that you don't value me, that you don't care about my feelings. So why should I stay?" Daniel stood as well, his jaw clenched. "You're not thinking clearly," he said. "You're upset, and you're blowing things out of proportion. Just calm down and we'll talk about this later." "There's nothing to talk about," I said, meeting his gaze. "This isn't a decision I made lightly, but it's the right one." For a moment, he just stared at me, his eyes searching mine as if looking for some sign of weakness, some crack in my resolve. But he didn't find one. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the kitchen, his pride and control slipping through his fingers. As I closed the door to the bedroom and began packing my things, I felt a strange sense of calm. It wasn't over yet, far from it, but this was the first step toward reclaiming my life, and I wasn't going to stop until I had taken back everything he had tried to take from me. This was just the beginning. As I zipped up the last of my suitcases, the weight of years lifted off my shoulders. The bedroom was eerily silent, save for the faint hum of the city outside the window. This room, once a sanctuary, had turned into a cage where I had endured countless nights of humiliation, self-doubt, and loneliness. But not anymore. I was ready to walk out and leave it all behind. The door creaked open, and Daniel stood there, his expression a mix of disbelief and panic. His usual air of confidence and superiority had crumbled, replaced by something I hadn't seen in years, fear. "You're really doing this?" he said, his voice low and trembling. It wasn't a question, it was an admission, as if he finally understood that I wasn't bluffing. Yes, I said simply, pulling the suitcase off the bed and setting it by the door. I'm done. Daniel took a step forward, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. Look, I know I messed up, okay? Last night, I shouldn't have said those things. It was stupid. I was stupid. But you can't just leave. Can't I? I asked, my tone calm but firm. I met his gaze, refusing to let him intimidate me. You made this decision for me, Daniel. Every time you humiliated me, mocked me, and treated me like I was less than, this didn't happen overnight. He ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. It was a joke, that's all. You're blowing this out of proportion. Stop saying that, I snapped, my voice rising for the first time. This isn't about last night. This is about every single time you made me feel small, every time you chose to hurt me instead of supporting me. I'm done pretending that this marriage is something it's not. Daniel's face hardened, his jaw tightening. And what are you going to do, just walk away, throw away everything we've built together? I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. What we've built, Daniel? The only thing we've built is a lie I'm no longer willing to live. For a moment he said nothing. His eyes darted to the suitcase by the door, then back to me. You're serious about this, he said quietly. I've never been more serious about anything, I replied. And then, to my surprise, he dropped to his knees. The sight of him, this man who had spent years tearing me down, kneeling before me was almost surreal. His hands clasped together and his voice broke as he spoke. Please, he said, his tone desperate. Don't leave. I'll change. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Just don't go. I stared at him, a part of me wanting to believe his words, to believe that he could change, that things could be different. But another part of me, stronger, wiser, knew better. Do you even hear yourself, Daniel? I asked, my voice steady. 15 minutes ago, you were telling me I was overreacting, that I was being dramatic. Now you're begging me to stay. What exactly has changed? I know I've been a terrible husband, he said, his voice cracking. I know I've hurt you, but I can't lose you. You're the only thing holding me together. I knelt down to his level, looking him in the eye. That's the problem, Daniel. I've been holding you together while you've been tearing me apart. I can't do it anymore. He reached for my hand, his grip tight and desperate. Just give me one more chance, please. I'll go to therapy. I'll stop drinking. This isn't about therapy or drinking or any of the excuses you've used before, I interrupted, pulling my hand away. This is about respect, and you lost mine a long time ago. Daniel's shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I thought he might cry. But then his expression shifted, his desperation giving way to anger. You think you're so perfect, don't you? He snapped, his voice sharp. Like you've never made mistakes, like you've never hurt anyone. I stood up, crossing my arms. I've made plenty of mistakes, Daniel, but staying with you for as long as I did, that was the biggest one. His face fell, and I saw the fight leave him. He sank back onto the floor, his head in his hands. What am I supposed to do without you? He whispered. That's not my problem, I said softly. You've spent years tearing me down, Daniel. Now it's time for you to figure out how to build yourself back up. I picked up my suitcase, my heart pounding as I walked toward the door. Daniel didn't try to stop me. He didn't say another word as I stepped out into the hallway. I felt a strange mix of emotions, sadness, relief, and a newfound sense of freedom. But as I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard his voice again, low and broken. You'll regret this, he said. I paused, my hand on the doorknob, and turned back to look at him. The only thing I regret is not leaving sooner, I said. With that, I walked out the door. The cool evening air hit my face like a breath of fresh air. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. As I loaded my suitcase into the trunk of my car, I thought about everything I was leaving behind, the pain, the humiliation, the constant battle to prove my worth to someone who never appreciated it. But I also thought about what I was gaining, a chance to start over, to rebuild my life on my terms. Daniel had always believed he held all the power in our relationship, but he was wrong. The real power had always been mine. I just hadn't realized it until now. As I drove away, the city lights flickering in the distance, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. I didn't know what the future held, But I knew one thing for certain: I would never let anyone make me feel small again. This wasn't the end of my story, it was just the beginning. As I drove away from the house that had felt more like a cage than a home, I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror. For a brief moment, I imagined Daniel standing at the door, his face pale and broken, but the house stood still and silent, just as it always had. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, forcing myself to focus on the road ahead. I had left, but this wasn't the end. Not for him, and certainly not for me. In the days that followed, I moved into a small apartment downtown. Nothing fancy, but just enough to make me feel free the first night I stood in the middle of the empty living room, my suitcase by my side, and allowed myself to breathe. No insults, no laughter at my expense, no Daniel. It felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, terrified yet exhilarated by the open air beneath me. But I wasn't just here to escape. I was here to reclaim what Daniel had taken from me, my dignity, my power, and every piece of myself I had sacrificed during our marriage. And if I knew anything about Daniel, it was that he thrived on control. Taking it away from him would hurt more than my leaving ever could. The first thing I did was reach out to an old friend, Laura. We hadn't spoken much over the years. Daniel had made sure of that, but she was someone I could trust. Laura had always been sharp, resourceful, and fiercely loyal, qualities I needed now more than ever. When I told her everything, she didn't mince words. "He's a bastard, and he deserves everything that's coming to him," she said, her voice firm. "So, what's the plan?" "I'm not sure yet," I admitted, "but I want to hit him where it hurts." Laura smirked, leaning back in her chair. "Well, that's easy. His ego, his reputation, and his wallet. Take away any of those, and he'll crumble." I nodded, my mind already racing with possibilities. Daniel had spent years building an image of himself as the perfect husband, the successful businessman, the charming socialite. But I knew the truth. Beneath the polished exterior was a man who lied, cheated, and manipulated everyone around him. It was time to let the world see him for who he really was. Over the next few weeks, I began digging into Daniel's life. Every lie he'd ever told, every shady deal he'd ever made, every secret he thought he'd buried. I was determined to find it all. I started with his financials. Daniel had always been secretive about money, insisting that he handled everything. I never questioned it, partly because I trusted him and partly because he made me feel incompetent whenever I tried. But now I had nothing to lose. It didn't take long to uncover the first crack in his armor. A few late-night sessions with Laura and her tech-savvy boyfriend revealed bank statements, offshore accounts, and transactions that didn't add up. Daniel had been hiding money, lots of it. Some of it was tied to questionable business deals, others to payments that had nothing to do with our household expenses. Then it was Serena. It was one thing to suspect an affair, but seeing the proof was another. I found emails, text messages, even photos of them together, all time-stamped during times he'd claimed to be working late. The betrayal stung, but it also fueled my determination. I knew that exposing Daniel wouldn't just require evidence, it would require strategy. He was a master manipulator, and if I came at him without a plan, he'd find a way to turn it against me. So I took my time, carefully organizing everything I'd found into a solid case. First, I made copies of all the financial records and forwarded them to a lawyer Laura had recommended. "This is enough to skin him," the lawyer said after reviewing the documents. "If you want a divorce, you'll walk away with everything, and then some." But divorce wasn't my only goal. I wanted to ruin Daniel in a way that went beyond legal proceedings. I wanted to strip him of the power he had used to humiliate me, to make him feel as small and powerless as he had made me feel. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Daniel was hosting another dinner party, one of his extravagant soirees where he paraded his success in front of his friends and associates. He hadn't invited me, of course. He probably assumed I was still licking my wounds somewhere, but that didn't matter. I didn't need an invitation to crash the party. Dressed in a sleek black dress that exuded confidence, I arrived at the event with Laura by my side. The room fell silent as I walked in, the sound of my heels echoing against the marble floor. Daniel's eyes widened when he saw me, his expression quickly shifting from shock to irritation. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, pulling me aside. "Just enjoying the party," I said with a sweet smile. After all, I am still your wife. For now. Before he could respond, I stepped onto the stage where a microphone was set up. The guests turned to look at me, their curiosity piqued. Daniel followed, his face pale as he realized what was happening. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice steady. "I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight. I'm sure Daniel has told you many wonderful things about his life, his success, and his honesty, but I think it's time we set the record straight." What followed was a public takedown unlike anything Daniel had ever experienced. I laid out the evidence of his financial misdeeds, his affair with Serena, and the lies he had told to maintain his image. The room was silent, the guests too stunned to speak. Daniel tried to interrupt, but Laura, ever the protector, stepped in to block him. By the time I was finished, Daniel's carefully curated facade had crumbled. His friends looked at him with disgust, his business associates murmured among themselves, and Serena, who had been sitting smugly in the corner, quietly slipped out the door. In the days that followed, Daniel's life began to unravel. His business partners distanced themselves from him, his social circle dissolved, and the press caught wind of the scandal, further tarnishing his reputation. He tried to reach out to me, leaving voicemails that ranged from apologetic to angry, but I didn't respond. I had nothing left to say to him. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free from his control, his insults, his lies. I had taken back the power he had stolen from me, and I wasn't about to let anyone take it away again. This was my revenge, not just on Daniel, but on the version of myself that had allowed him to diminish me. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my strength, and as I stood in my new apartment, looking out at the city lights, I knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning of the life I was meant to live. I sat in my small but cozy apartment, the soft hum of the city filtering through the window. The revenge plan had been executed with precision, and Daniel's life had begun to fall apart. But I wasn't finished. Taking back my power wasn't just about bringing him down, it was about building something stronger for myself. The fire inside me burned brightly, fueled by the knowledge that I had reclaimed control over my life. Now it was time to ensure that Daniel felt the consequences of every choice he had made, every cruel word he had uttered. The fallout from my revelations was swift and brutal. Daniel's perfect world crumbled like a house of cards, the foundation of lies he had built his life on, unable to withstand the truth. News of his financial misdeeds spread quickly, and his business partners, once loyal to him, were now scrambling to distance themselves. Contracts were canceled, deals fell apart, and the glossy image of a successful businessman he had worked so hard to maintain was shattered. But the most satisfying blow came from Serena. It seemed that Daniel had been as careless with her trust as he had been with mine. When she learned that he had been siphoning money from one of their joint investments to cover personal expenses, she turned on him publicly. Serena, ever the opportunist, gave an exclusive interview to a local magazine, painting Daniel as a manipulative liar who had used her as much as he had used everyone else in his life. Her betrayal was the final nail in the coffin. Daniel's reputation was now irreparably damaged. But it wasn't just his public life that had been destroyed. Privately, he was unraveling. Friends stopped returning his calls, his family expressed disappointment, and the lavish lifestyle he had once flaunted was slipping through his fingers. I knew all this not because I spoke to him. I hadn't answered a single one of his calls or messages, but because Laura kept me informed. She seemed to enjoy the updates as much as I did. It was late one evening when I heard a knock at my apartment door. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I peered through the peephole, I wasn't surprised to see Daniel standing there. He looked nothing like the man I had once known. His suit was wrinkled, his tie askew, and his face pale and drawn, as if he hadn't slept in days. For a moment, I considered not answering, but something inside me told me to face him one last time. I opened the door and stepped aside, allowing him to enter. He stood in the middle of the living room, looking around at the modest space as if he couldn't believe this was where I had chosen to live. "This is where you've been staying?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I crossed my arms, leaning against the wall. "What do you want, Daniel?" He turned to face me, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and desperation. "You've ruined me," he said, his voice trembling. "You've taken everything from me." I raised an eyebrow. I didn't ruin you, Daniel. You did that to yourself. All I did was make sure everyone else saw the truth. You didn't have to do it like this, he snapped, his voice rising. You could have handled it privately. You didn't have to humiliate me in front of everyone. I let out a bitter laugh. You mean the way you humiliated me? The way you mocked me in front of your friends, your lover, anyone who would listen? Forgive me if I don't feel bad about giving you a taste of your own medicine. He took a step closer, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. I know I hurt you, all right? I know I made mistakes. But this is cruel. Cruel? I repeated, my voice sharp. Cruel is spending years tearing someone down until they don't even recognize themselves anymore. Cruel is making the person who loves you feel like they're worthless. Don't talk to me about cruel, Daniel. You don't know the meaning of the word. For a moment he said nothing. His shoulders slumped and the fight seemed to drain out of him. I loved you, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. I still do. I stared at him, the words ringing hollow in my ears. You don't know how to love, Daniel, I said. Not really. Love isn't about control or power or making someone feel small so you can feel big. Love is about respect, and you lost mine a long time ago. He opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand, cutting him off. I don't owe you anything, Daniel, not an explanation, not forgiveness, nothing. You need to leave. He hesitated, his eyes searching mine as if looking for a glimmer of the woman who used to hang on his every word. But she was gone, and I wasn't about to let him drag me back into the darkness I had fought so hard to escape. Finally, he nodded, turning toward the door. As he reached for the handle, he paused, his voice soft. I hope you're happy. I didn't respond. A moment later, the door closed behind him. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where he had been. My heart was heavy, but resolute. It wasn't closure, not really, but it was enough. The weeks that followed were a blur of small victories. With Daniel out of my life, I began to rebuild in ways I hadn't thought possible. I started going to therapy, unpacking the years of pain and learning to trust myself again. I reconnected with old friends, people Daniel had driven away, and found comfort in their unwavering support. But the biggest victory came when I found a new sense of purpose. For years, I had put my own dreams on hold, sacrificing my ambitions for the sake of a marriage that had only drained me. Now, I was free to chase those dreams without anyone holding me back. I enrolled in a business course, something I had always wanted to do, and began working toward opening my own small consulting firm. It was a slow process, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. As for Daniel, I heard through the grapevine that he had left the city, unable to face the fallout from his actions. His name no longer carried the weight it once did, and the world he had built on lies had crumbled beneath him. I didn't feel sorry for him, not in the way he wanted me to, but I did hope he learned something from the experience, not for his sake, but for the sake of anyone who might cross his path in the future. One evening, as I sat on the balcony of my apartment, a glass of wine in hand, I thought about everything that had happened. The pain, the humiliation, the anger. It was all still there, lingering beneath the surface, but it didn't control me anymore. I had taken that power back, and with it, I had found myself again. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into that dinner party, desperate for her husband's approval. I was stronger now, wiser, and determined never to let anyone make me feel small again. The road ahead wasn't easy, but it was mine, and for the first time in years I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. As I watched the city lights twinkle in the distance, I raised my glass to the future. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that was enough. The city lights twinkled like tiny stars as I sipped my wine, the crisp evening air brushing against my face. Sitting on the balcony of my small apartment, I felt a sense of calm that I hadn't experienced in years. The chaos of my life with Daniel was over, and with it came a quiet freedom. But this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something entirely new. I wasn't just moving on from him, I was rediscovering who I was. The first step in reclaiming my life was learning to embrace my independence. At first, it was terrifying. After years of being tethered to someone who dictated every aspect of my existence, the idea of making my own decisions felt foreign. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to find joy in the little things, choosing a new shade of paint for my walls, experimenting with recipes in my small kitchen. Even something as simple as rearranging the furniture gave me a sense of control. Therapy played a crucial role in this transformation. I poured out the years of pain, humiliation, and self-doubt to a patient and understanding therapist who helped me untangle the knots Daniel had tied in my mind. "You're not weak for staying," she said during one session. "You're brave for leaving, for choosing yourself." Those words stayed with me, echoing in my head whenever the doubt crept back in. I also started reconnecting with the passions I had long buried. Writing had always been an outlet for me, a way to make sense of the world, but I hadn't picked up a pen in years. Now, with a fresh journal and an open mind, I wrote every night, pouring my thoughts onto the pages. At first, it was just for me, a therapeutic release. But over time, the idea of sharing my story began to take root. My newfound sense of independence wasn't just about rediscovering old passions. It was also about carving out a new path for myself. I enrolled in a business course at a local college, something I had dreamed of doing for years but had always been discouraged from pursuing. Daniel had made me believe I wasn't capable, that my place was in the background supporting his ambitions. But now I was determined to prove to myself that I was more than enough. The course was challenging, but I threw myself into it with everything I had. Late nights spent studying, networking events where I pushed myself out of my comfort zone, and moments of self-doubt that I overcame one step at a time. All of it built a new foundation for my life. I wasn't just learning about business, I was learning about resilience, about the strength I had carried within me all along. Through the course, I met people who saw me for who I was, not as someone's wife or a woman defined by her past. Their encouragement and belief in me became a source of strength, and for the first time in years, I began to see myself through their eyes, not as a victim, but as a survivor. One night, as I flipped through my journal, I realized just how far I had come. The pages were filled with raw, unfiltered thoughts, anger, sadness, hope, determination. It was a map of my journey. From the moment I decided to leave Daniel to the person I was becoming, that's when it hit me. My story wasn't just mine. It was a story that could resonate with others, with anyone who had ever felt trapped, diminished, or voiceless. The idea of sharing my story terrified me at first. What if people judged me? What if they didn't believe me? But then I remembered all the nights I had spent doubting myself because of Daniel, all the times I had let fear hold me back. This time, I wouldn't let it. I began writing articles, submitting them to blogs and magazines that focused on empowerment and healing. To my surprise, my words struck a chord. Messages began pouring in from readers who shared their own experiences, thanking me for giving voice to feelings they couldn't articulate. The connections I formed through those words became a source of healing, not just for me, but for them as well. Eventually, I was invited to speak at an event for survivors of emotional and psychological abuse. Standing in front of a room full of strangers, my heart pounding, I shared my story, the good, the bad, and everything in between. By the time I finished, the room was silent, and for a moment, I worried I had said too much. But then the applause started, and tears filled my eyes as I realized that my pain had a purpose. As I continued to rebuild my life, I heard bits and pieces about Daniel. He had left the city, unable to face the wreckage of his reputation. His business had gone under, and the lavish lifestyle he had once flaunted was now a distant memory. He had tried to contact me a few times, leaving voicemails that alternated between apologetic and accusatory, but I never responded. My life no longer revolved around him, and I wasn't about to let him pull me back into his orbit. One day, I received a letter from him. It was handwritten, the words sprawling across the page in a way that felt desperate. He apologized for everything, for the humiliation, the manipulation, the betrayal. He wrote about how much he missed me, how he wished he could undo the past. But the letter wasn't about me, it was about him, about his guilt and his regret. He wanted forgiveness, but I wasn't ready to give it to him. Maybe I never would. Instead, I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about letting him off the hook. It was about freeing myself from the weight of his actions, and in time, I knew I would get there. But for now, I was content to let it sit, a reminder of how far I had come. By the end of the year, my life looked nothing like it had before. My consulting business was taking off, my writing was being published in major outlets, and I had built a community of people who supported and uplifted me. But the biggest change was within me. I had found my voice, my strength, and my sense of self, all things Daniel had tried to take away but couldn't destroy. One evening, as I prepared to speak at another event, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the microphone clipped to my dress. The woman staring back at me was someone I barely recognized, confident, poised, and unafraid. The scars of my past were still there, faint reminders of what I had endured, but they no longer defined me. They were part of my story, but they weren't the whole story. As I stepped onto the stage, the audience's applause washed over me, and I felt a surge of gratitude. Not just for the people who had supported me, but for myself, for the woman who had decided to take back her life, no matter how hard it seemed. I smiled, looking out at the crowd, and began to speak. "My name is Emily," I said, my voice steady, "and this is my story. But more importantly, it's a story about survival, about strength, and about the power we all have to rise from the ashes." The applause that followed was deafening, but it wasn't just for me. It was for every person in that room who had ever felt powerless, for everyone who was still searching for their voice. And in that moment, I knew I had found my purpose, not in revenge, but in rising above it. The phoenix had risen, and it was ready to soar.